In the last section of this chapter or this module, we're going to talk about exponents and order of operations. Part 1, we're going to go ahead and do an introduction to exponents and how we will be using them in this course. The only thing that you need to know for this section is understand how to multiply signed numbers. Upon completing this presentation, you will be able to understand basic computations with exponents. You will also know how exponents affect negative numbers. The second objective is going to be one of the primary focuses or primary things that we are going to focus on in this section. Let's start with some vocabulary. An exponent represents the number of times that a number is multiplied by itself. The exponent is written to the upper right of the number. The other term that we have when we talk about exponents is base. The base is the number that is being multiplied. So if we look at an example, 10 cubed, 3 is the exponent, 10 is the base. We can expand this out and write it out as 10 times 10 times 10, and we call this expanded form. If we simplify it, we get 1,000. This is known as simplified form. Note, if we write it with exponents, we call the form exponential form. Let's look at some examples so that we can see what we're going to do. I'm going to start by writing each one of these in expanded form before I evaluate it. If we look at example A, we have 4 squared, or 4 to the second power. So in exponential form, or in expanded form, we want to have 4 times 4. The 2 tells us I want 2 bases being multiplied together. If we simplify this now, 4 times 4 is equal to 16. So 4 squared is equal to 16. If we come over to example B, we have -5 cubed. In expanded form, what this is equal to is -5 times -5 times -5. -5 is the number being multiplied, and the 3 tells me I have 3 of them being multiplied. Since we are back to multiplication, note that we can go ahead and use our rules for multiplying signed numbers. So I'm going to start by multiplying my 5's together. 5 times 5 is 25. Times 5 is 125. I have 3 negatives, which means that my final answer will be negative. Or remember, we had the trick where we can cross them out in pairs. Since I still have 1 left, I will need 1 in my answer. So -5 cubed is equal to -125. Now let's look at example C and D. Example C and D, note that these two, though we have, it looks like our base is the same and we have the same exponent. These two do represent different things. It is very important to note whether you have parentheses or don't have parentheses. So let's start with example C. We have -2 inside parentheses raised to the 4th power. So in expanded form, what this is equal to is -2 times -2 times -2 times -2. We can go ahead and multiply the numbers together. We get 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. Now we want to figure out our sign. Since there is an even number of negatives, we do end up with a positive 16. Or we can cross out our negatives in pairs, and we get no negatives are left over, so our answer will be positive. So this is what happens when it is inside the parentheses. We include the negative in our multiplications in each one of our factors. So if it is not inside parentheses, what does that mean? Well, if it's not inside parentheses, what we're actually looking at is the exponent is not acting on the negative. What we basically have here is minus 2 to the fourth. And so what we end up with is minus 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So we can go ahead and multiply our 2's together. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. And now, this one, we do need to keep the negative with our final answer. A couple semesters ago, I had a group doing a group quiz, and I kept hearing one lady in the group talk about, but it's the baby. You got to take the baby with you to the store. You can't go to the store without your baby. And I sat there for the longest time as they all argued about this. And finally, when they turned in their quiz, I looked at her and I said, "What are you talking about with the baby?" And she said, "The negative, it's the baby. You have to take the baby with you. You can't go without the baby." And so I sat there and I was like, okay. And so I looked at her and said, if you want to treat the baby as, or if you want to treat the negative as the baby, if you're going to take it with you, you have to put it in the van. So if you want to apply the exponent to the negative, you have to make sure the negative is inside parentheses. So if that helps you remember it, that's fine. As far as I'm concerned, whatever helps you remember these rules is always a good thing. So let's kind of recap what we have for our rules here. So the first rule that we have is any number raised to an even power is positive. If it's positive, it's going to be positive. If it's negative, you have an even number of negatives, which means that they will all cancel out. The second rule we have is any number raised to an odd power keeps its sign. If it starts positive, it will stay positive. If it starts negative, then it will stay negative. If you think about it, you have an odd number of negatives, so you will always have one negative left over. The last rule we have is if a negative is not inside the parentheses, the result is always negative, irregardless of whether your exponent is even or odd, because the negative is considered separate from the exponent. When will we see this again? We will see exponents again in the next two sections when we talk about order of operations and evaluating expressions. We will expand our rules of exponents when we talk about polynomials in Chapter 5. We will also see exponents again when we talk about quadratic equations, including graphing polynomials and solving using the quadratic formula. Try the following problems on your own and bring your answers to class along with any questions that you may have.